HI guys, before I start the video, please subscribe to our channel and comment what video you want to watch next. Now let's begin the stories. Story 1. This story is about how some people tried to have some deal with demons for wealth. I've experienced several things throughout my 36 years that could be unexplained supernatural occurrences. When I was a kid, in particular, I had some recurring harassment that would make me afraid to be in my room. Enough so that my mother purchased me one of those little red bed tents that kids in the 80s liked so well. I ran into some odd situations while at sea in the Navy too. Anyway, I had essentially forgotten about most of my previous experiences because I became somewhat of a closed-minded skeptic. Even when things cropped up as an adult that I noted were odd and couldn't explain. 3 years and some change ago, the VA accidentally declared me dead, which had just been one in a series of negative events in my life that started a decline in my expectations for the future. During that time, a buddy of mine, who was like a brother and whom I had known since I was 6, moved in with me as his life was also spiraling downwards. One night, we decided to watch related to an ex-girlfriend of mine who needed to escape their abusive family, living in my fridge basement. The basement had no entry from the house. You had to leave the house to access it. So it was like their as long as they helped, with my son, cleaned, cooked 2 meals a week. The girls were the ones who suggested that my buddy and I should look for videos about bargaining with the supernatural. The videos weren't particularly helpful, but we decided to start easy and went with the poor man's wager, the game called Charlie. I'm sure everyone knows what it is, but in case you're not familiar, you place a pencil on a piece of paper, split into 4 squares with yes or no written in opposite corners. One pencil sits in the center, and the other pencil is balanced on top of it. Then you ask questions like, Charlie, we did this a few times and had enough success that my buddy posted a video of the pencil turning on its own to his Facebook account. Invigorated by our success and the potential to gain loot from whatever we made a deal with, we smoked a bunch of super dank reefer and came up with a trade template. We were operating under the assumption that everyone who traded their soul to the devil did so in a rush to be famous or rich without caring how unbalanced the trade might be for them. We came up with a 30 for 30 trade. At the time, I was around 33 and figured 30 years of service to a malevolent entity after death wasn't until it scratched me enough to bleed. I pressed my thumb into the cut and then onto the Charlie paper. This, I believe, was the catalyst for the weird stuff that has continued to this day. My buddy refused to put his own blood on the paper. He was raised Christian and steadily became less involved, becoming more of a witness as I pushed forward. I don't remember verbatim what I said, but essentially, I laid out my deal and expectations. I offered 30 years of service after my death for 30 years of wealth and influence. I didn't want fame. It seemed like more work than it was worth. I just wanted enough money to successful. The pencil didn't spin, the lights didn't flicker, and there was no sudden cold breeze. My buddy and I did, however, feel a simultaneous sensation of being watched. We both turned around to see if the girls had come into the house, or if one of my sons had woken up. Nothing. We were alone. My buddy slept on one of the sofas, and I fell asleep on my recliner in front of my coffee table, where the Bloody Charlie game rested. I slept easily, though I felt a bit uneasy, as if someone was staring at me. When I woke up, I followed my usual routine. I didn't think about the night before until I grabbed an odd handprint on the coffee table facing me. The fingertips were pointed toward where I had slept. I took a picture of it because it was so strange. The print was smaller than my hand, the fingers thinner, and there were only 4 digits, 3 thumbs, and 1 finger. The weirdest part was the nails. They seemed to have left an impression on the table, looking like pointed claws. The table's dark surface had what seemed like a hot, sweaty, oddly shaped hand placed there long enough to leave a smudgy, dark imprint. I put my hand next to it, but mine was much too big. My buddy's hands were also too big. My youngest son's hands were too small, and so were my oldest son's. When the girls came up from the basement, I interrupted them before they could tell me about their night. I had them place their hands next to the imprint, but their hands were too small as well. Then they told me they thought my buddy and I had kept them up all night, assuming we'd gotten drunk and jammed out to 90s rock and metal. Hadn't had a single drink and had turned off the videos after we came across the Charlie game. The only noise had been us talking excitedly at some points. However, the girls said there was a bunch of loud thumping and constant heavy music. In their words, they consider Korn heavy music. The 18-year-old swore she thought we had legitimately had a party going on with even more of our friends. My sons, however, heard nothing. It was weird, but we all sort of dismissed it as odd and noteworthy, but nothing more. That night, my buddy and I looked at some more videos about demons and bargaining with them. We watched a Things around the house seemed more uneasy. My buddy and I were both feeling unnerved, and every noise the house made seemed unnatural. Eventually, we turned on Aqua Teen Hunger Force and passed out in the same places as the night before. The following morning, the coffee table that I had since wiped down, erasing the previous prints, now had 2 of the same impressions on it, both facing me as the ones from the previous morning. The only noticeable difference was that there were 2 prints, and the thumbs were again in the same place as the human thumbs. However, once again, there were only 4 the rake from the famous creepypasta. I confessed creepypastas were whack to me, so I wasn't familiar with this story at the time. I took time to watch a few versions explaining it. lights in the basement turning on and off, and the sound of something scratching at their door, and one door that leads outside into the woods at the edge of my property. We live in the woods on a mountain with a few acres of land, so the idea of something scratching at the door isn't too far from likely. I've even had bears wander on my land, so something scratching at the door is certainly not unheard of around here. The girls continued having nights of being freaked out. The girls grew so frightened, they moved upstairs and slept on the other two sofas. Now, the four adults in the house slept in the living room, while my son slept in their own rooms. I have my own bedroom, but I just don't like sleeping in beds. The girls continued to have odd experiences in the bathroom, feeling like they were being watched, the shower curtain being pulled back when no one was in the room. My sons both woke up with what appeared to be cat scratches on their chest one morning. They seemed superficial enough, but they were spooked, because my cats will suffer anything except me using them to dust tables. That's how I got them to this time on the upstairs door, and not the basement. As a combat vet, I have firearms, so my buddy and I stepped outside and searched the immediate area. We kept hearing rustling, so we followed it around the edge of the property until we got down by the basement. We both noticed the light was on, but my buddy was the first to notice movement through the windows. In order to prevent air leaks, a few windows in the basement had been covered with weatherproof plastic, so we could only make out the shadow of a head moving back and forth. Whoever it was certainly didn't belong in my basement, and especially not at nighttime. They would be safely escorted from the property, whereas jumping out could lead to being injured. But there was no response, no sound. All the lights were on, and the door had been wide open. The majority of my basement is open space, with just one finished room, save a missing door. The older girl had stayed there, and she had hung a blanket in place of a door. My buddy was standing behind me, and when I moved the blanket hanging in the door, all the lights in the basement shut off with a totally audible snap. My buddy called out, "What is it?" and ran outside. I followed him out behind his movements. And ran out ahead of him. When he said, "What is it?" he thought he was talking to me, running past him, despite the fact I hadn't moved until he left the basement. I closed the door and put a cement block in front of it. We went back upstairs, put the rifles away, and described what happened. Upstairs, the power had gone out too. But when the girls had gone to the breaker box, which is upstairs in a broom closet, some weird 70s design, the power came back on without an issue, perhaps to the basement as well, though I'm unsure whether we noticed it did or not. The girls moved out. They still keep in touch and visit. I tried to make a deal. I've repeatedly pointed out to them that I received no such bounty as stated in the deal I offered. They pointed out that just a couple of months after the Charlie game, the VA finally fixed their mistake about my status. which he used to travel for a while before coming back to this area. There continued to be odd circumstances around the house. We've seen odd footprints in the snow and mud outside of the house, on the patio, and around the cars. We've heard noises in the basement and around the house. Once, the steps to the attic had been pulled down and left open for some reason. I wake up sometimes with inexplicable scratches on my head, arms, or legs. But again, they're more superficial. I don't have any scars from them. At this point, I can't rule out that the cats scratch me in my sleep too, especially if I'm used for a dust rag for kicks. But I certainly didn't receive what I was expecting for the offer I made. The girls have told me they think I let something loose that is essentially angry with me, that my deal isn't weighted in its favor, so it's stuck being a minor annoyance, while I make fun of it for not giving me any of my loot. 30-30 is a fair trade, and I stand by it. It'll need to make more than a trivial paw print to change my mind on that.